Yo. Okay. We're back. Round 2 of Big Idea 2, looking at interactions among branches of government. So, in the first podcast, we looked at the legislative branch. A lot going on there, to say the least. So, now we wander into the realm of the president, the executive branch, Article 2 of the Constitution. And if we're looking at our main objective here, it's how the president and the powers granted in the Constitution, and then, of course, those, which we talked about a little bit in class, have expanded over time for certain. And are being tested again right now in the year 2019. So, let's see. Explain how president powers or functions can promote a policy agenda. So you're looking at, even though they don't have legislative powers to make laws, how can they still do that? All right, so let's jump into it. And there's a lot of ways presidents can do this, both formally and informally. One of the ways, which I just thought I'd throw it here, but watch this in class, is through the State of the Union, which is granted. Not specifically where and when this has to take place. It's in the Constitution that's specific, but in terms of when this takes place, we just had ours a couple weeks ago, right? 2 weeks ago, Tuesday. So this is where the president can lay out goals and objectives, etc., and gain public support. Then that public support can turn into phone calls, emails, etc., to Congress people, and then they could go about hopefully enacting that. And since Trump's his ratings were down in the toilet in the low 30s since his speech, it's almost now up to the 50s. So it seems like people liked what he said. It'd be bad if they didn't. I mean, those things are carefully choreographed to say the right thing, to appeal to a large swath of American ideas. You usually get military this and that, law and order this and that, taxes down, all these things that are, like a child talking to Santa Claus, if that makes sense. Wait, no, it'd be Santa Claus telling the kid. Yeah, that's better. So this is hilarious. We'll watch it. All right, I found these old things because I don't know how many people actually know, just generally speaking, what does the president do? And these, of course, are little books meant for kids to figure that out. So there are some basic things that I expect you to know walking into this class, but let's review some of those. Again, more just memes. Hey, you know what? It's actually President's Day, the day I'm recording this. Let's see. There are several crash courses to check out for you. You got episode 11, episode 12, episode 14, before you get into this slide here. So check those out. And I'll leave this slide up as I talk through some of the things. So, probably the main power the president has, going back to our objective, is simply the veto. So when the House and the Senate come together with a bill, it goes to the president's desk. He can simply choose to veto it. And that just means to cancel, to get rid of. So that ends that. These are very, very formal powers. Etc. There's some other ideas in there as well, namely the pocket veto. As you see there, you just don't do anything for 10 days and the bill automatically dies. That tends to become more of a political purpose. The message you're sending to Congress is that I'm not going to sign this, so you better come up with a different version of it. So it's a political maneuver more than anything else. All right. So, I mean, really, if I'm looking at our curriculum, that's the only ideas we have to know about in terms of veto. It's simple defining ideas. Some other things you should probably know. I think this is the definition. We'll get to that executive order idea. But the president is considered the commander in chief of the army. Therefore, they have great influence in determining foreign policy. We're going to have a guest come in this Friday to discuss that. So we'll hold off on that and actually talk about it more when we talk about Federalist Paper number 70. One of the biggest things that we've already talked about a little bit is the idea of an executive order and what that does for a president. So this is one of those implied powers, not specifically, explicitly stated, but it's a way for the president to make sure, ideally, that he can carry out the functions of his office. So it's incredibly vague. However, used all the time. So it's a check, I guess, against Congress. And it is, again, we'll talk about it in Federal 70. The idea behind it is to exactly give the president an incredible amount of almost like dictatorial powers. Now, these things have time limits on them. They can be reversed by the next presidency, and they can also be overturned by Congress. But they are pretty interesting, and we'll look at those as well as we talk about the wall more than anything else. What else we got? There's also something called signing statements, which are really not all that important in terms of my opinion. You don't hear about them too much. They're just again, an informal idea of the president signing something, of how he intends to interpret something. We can look at that too in class in terms of, with this current president, how many they've been, and look at those. But they're more of braggadocious. You might even know some people who have like pens from some of these signings. Each one of these they sign, there's a pen, and they mail the pen out. I don't know. But it's another way of shaping public policy, because it gets the president's ideas out to the public, but there's no real teeth to any of that. More importantly, as we look at our second objective. So if you go back to our first one, we're looking at really the idea of know what a veto is, know what a pocket veto is, understand commander-in-chief idea, understand executive orders. And that's kind of like the rote memorization list from that. Actually, it kind of feels still stuffy up in my nose. All right. So, great scene from the most recent State of the Union, because it shows literally the posturing and the tension that a president's agenda can create with Congress. Now, the last 2 years, not to date this because then I can't use these year to year, you had the president, both the Senate and the House, were all in agreement with each other, yet for whatever reason, the main policy issue, if we're looking at the wall, was not done. I don't know why that was, considering since November, now we have a divided government. There was the push for the wall, knowing that it's not going to get done. I mean, we had the government shutdown, the negotiations, now to the point of money being allocated for the wall, much less than the president wanted. He should have pushed for it in the first 2 years. That's a huge blunder. And now you have executive action taking place, which some are going to argue is a huge violation of the Constitution. Even though these things have been done in the past, we will look at why that is that. So, explain how the president's agenda could create tension and frequent confrontations with Congress. Yeah, well, when they disagree, they have different goals. So it's obviously going to be tenuous and tenuous. So how do they move forward to get anything done? Well, under Obama, you had Mitch McConnell, the leader, majority of the Senate, and majority leader basically said, we're not working with this president at all. We are not going to pass anything in his policy. We will block everything, and that will be our confrontation. And that was pretty much the lay of the law. And I mean, again, many said, well, that's good in terms of your policy, but you're setting up a precedent for what could happen to the next president. And now you're in that era. All right. So one element in terms to be familiar with is that the president does not work alone. He has what's known as his cabinet, among other things. And these, you can see there, are persons appointed by executive, lead executive departments, and be official advisors. So it's a way for the president to get help. There's a lot going on in the world. So a cabinet member should be an expert in that field. We looked at Lincoln. He actually chose people that he disagreed with so that he could get a roundabout, sense of what's the right and wrong thing to do with that. Now, these people that are appointed, of course, have to be approved. Usually it is a quick process. There's really not much conflict within that, so it's pretty easy. And there are plenty of cabinet departments. You can see in the bottom there some of the main ones. Department of Defense and the Secretary of State being the biggest. What else we got? Yeah, I mean, again, this is not a great just lecture type class. It's more of we got to apply this stuff to issues, which is very hard to do through a podcast. So I apologize. I'm just trying to power through some of this. But what else we got? Bear with me. All right, so now we get into explain how presidents have interpreted and justified their use of formal and informal powers. That's where we have to take a look at federal number 70, which we'll take a look at closer in class. But in essence, Hamilton is arguing that the executive branch needs to be a very, very, very strong branch. And he gets to the idea of, maybe we never even considered this in class. Why don't we have 3 presidents or 2 presidents or 7 presidents? Why do we have 1? So we can look at some of this together, or you can do it on your own. But looking at some of the review of it, let me go back real quick. If you click on here, that'll actually take you to the actual document itself. Very difficult to read. But that's why I'd rather actually have a conversation of it when I'm actually talking with you as opposed to just talking at you. Here are some highlights of it. You can pause those things and take a look at it, but we'll come back to that. All right. All right. Along comes the 22nd Amendment. Be familiar with this. Hamilton wanted a president that had a life tenure. The compromise was that every 4 years, the people should review that. Well, there was no such thing as term limits yet up until FDR. So finally, in the 1940s, the 22nd Amendment is passed that limits the terms in office. So it's just an example of changing the role of the president from getting too out of hand and becoming too dictatorial going forward. And really, I think the main objective of this whole presidential section is looking at really understanding, and this is the key in my opinion, understanding what Federalist 70 says in terms of what the president should be, and then looking at a few examples, not even historically, but right now, that understand that the role of the president continues to change and debated constantly. And the best context of that right now would be the issue of the wall. So we might have already been done with it by now. And I think going back to the number one objective here is, looking at, I want to pull it back up real quick. The policy agenda is the way the president has been able to communicate with people and other branches. And technology has definitely done that. Before, you'd have to wait for, a newspaper to come out, and there's nothing to say the president has to say anything. We saw in Lincoln, the president would just meet with common people, but that information isn't going to travel far. So the State of the Union, probably an antiquated notion, was once a year where you'd see that. Now, the main form, we saw it first with President Obama, was through the internet, and now, of course, with Trump, the tweet storms, and how that has changed the relationship of the president with the people. Some say it's not very presidential. Others say it's more presidential because it's more democratic, et cetera, et cetera. So even before, you get to Obama, you have what's known as the bully pulpit. So pulpit being something you talk about, like a church wise. So the bully pulpit, you got Teddy Roosevelt, the one that is the, what's the word I'm looking for? The individual best exemplifies the idea of, I'm just going to tell you up front what it is I think. I will bully you into this policy. Everywhere I go, I will talk about it. I will use the presidency. It's almost like a common phrase of this, as a bully pulpit. And you can see there's been tons of political cartoons. We'll take a look, and again, these are useless right now, but we should analyze these in class. You can check this out. I probably won't show because it's a little outdated at this point, but all the tweets that have shown up. All right, so I'm going to end this one, a short one, because our next one will be on the Supreme Court, the idea of judicial review, and again, we're looking at interactions among government. So, peace.